Hello and welcome back. We are today. It's so good to see you guys. I'm so happy to be here. We're talking shoulder joint action today for the whole hour. And this is really exciting because we talked hip joint action last week and shoulder joint action. Hey, Gary, I'm so glad you're here with me. Hi. Shoulder joint action is easy to, I think, follow after hip joint action because it's also a 360 joint in the body. But why do we need to know the joint actions anywhere in the body is really where I want us to start today. We want to know the joint actions so that we know what muscle to target. And if we know what muscle to target, then when we have clients that present with pain, we can know what muscle is causing the pain or what dysfunction is causing the pain and then target it. So if we don't know what muscle is doing the movement, we don't know what muscle to target, but what is the movement that's supposed to happen is how we visually assess to be able to determine what muscle is going on. So I'm going to explain all of that today as we move through our training. I will say we've talked about this. I have talked about this with practitioners in other places. And what I get to hear from movement practitioners is that when we break it down in the way that I'm going to break it down for you today, the movement practitioners get really clear on what they're meant to be targeting during the movement. And manual practitioners have a context, they say, on what to treat and why they need to treat it when we move through the information in this way. So what we're going to talk about today is great for both manual and movement practitioners alike, as it is always. And I'm definitely here to pour into you about that. So that's what we're going to do. If you guys are here with me live on YouTube, please do leave me a note and let me know that. I always have fun trying to work two devices at the same time. So here we are with club seats. Gary's in our club, and I'm happy to have you here with me live. This is awesome. And okay, there it is. I see it now live streaming from YouTube, and somebody's here. Hi, tell me who's here so I know who I'm talking to. Leave a high five for me or something in the comment section if you're watching live on YouTube. And of course, feel free to continue to use that area of YouTube to ask your questions. This is your Q&A time as well. So I'm going to pour into you for some time here. We're going to workshop out today as well, which we did last week, and I thought we had a lot of fun. We haven't been able to do too much workshopping in Tuesday training, so I'm so glad that we had that opportunity and that it worked. So we're going to ride that wave a little bit. If you are new here and you've never seen this training before, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I am your host for the hour. I'm Gina Schatz, and I am here to share with you exactly how I work and have been working clinically for 31 years, eradicating pain at the source. And the source matters. The source matters because we don't want to chase symptoms. We don't want to learn fancy techniques. We don't want to have our clients feel better for a little while. We want to get to the problem and fix the problem, not what the problem created. And so we have to do a little bit more digging to get to what the problem created, and that's what we're here to do. So I'm here to share all of that with you for the time that we're together. We're going to be together for an hour today. I'm going to do my best to talk a little, workshop a bunch, and then still have time to open up for Q&A. So please feel free to leave your questions for me in the chat. If you are joining us here on YouTube, I will definitely get to all the questions. And all of what I'm going to share with you today on shoulder joint action and knowing the joint action and the muscles that do the joint action and why we need to know that, all of this is a part of a greater course, a larger course, the 8 Principles of Functional Anatomy, which is currently running in our club. So club members have access to the entire course for the month. It's a 16-hour course. Okay, Gary, thanks for letting me know. It's a 16-hour course. We have lessons, we have workshopping, and also during club membership, we also have study groups. So you can come in and really work live in person with other practitioners who've taken the course many, 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 many times. And so again, this Applied Functional Anatomy 8 Principles course is running right now inside our club. All club members have access to the course for free. It's included in the club. Club membership is $39 a month if you pay for the year. Or you could just come for 7 days and do a 7-day trial with no obligation to stay and have access to the entire course and the study groups and a challenge that we run every month. And me, I'm in there mentoring and training as well. So please come and join us and dive into the course, the full course, and you'll get CEs for that as well if you choose to do that, if you're looking for CEs to keep your license or credentials current. Okay, so let's get into it for today. We're doing joint action. As always, we're going to start our journey at the beginning of the hour-ish here with our first letter of Pin It to Win It. So our Pin It to Win It game is to celebrate those of you who move through the entire training with me. You're going to collect letters along the way that I will hold up and pin in the corner of the screen here along the way. And as you get to the end of the training, you will have spelled an entire word. You put the word that you spelled in the comment section below, and then each week, each Pin It to Win It opportunity means that not only are you a badass, but I will congratulate you by sending you another training, an external training, because I want to acknowledge that you're here to really, drink it all in. And so that's what the Pin It to Win It game is about. If you have already won Pin It to Win It, we've acknowledged you in the comment section, and just make sure that we do have your email address. So some of you who are subscribers on the YouTube channel, we don't have your email address, and I want to be able to send the training to you. I can't leave a link in YouTube for you to get it because YouTube doesn't like external links. But if you just send us an email, we won't spam you. We'll just send you the extra training. All right, so shoulder joint action. Here we go. Ready? Shoulder. The joint action at the shoulder is the most 360 joint in the body. It is a ball and socket joint. Because of its design and where it is also the most unstable joint in the body, interestingly enough. But by unstable, I don't want us to start thinking that something's wrong with it, because there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with anything about you anywhere, okay? It's just that we need to know our design so we can be responsible for the design. So let's just have our fancy assistant join us for a moment here. Shoulder joint, bing, bing. Okay, this bone is, which is this bone? I know you know this. Gary, do you want to mouth it? What's this bone? No, it's over your head. You come on, I just caught you in stage fright for a second. Okay, if you're here watching live, type the name of this bone in the comments, in the chat. This bone and this bone meet. What's the name of this bone? You know this one, Gary. Scapula, exactly. So this bone and this bone meet right here. This is where they articulate. And articulation is a joint where two bones meet, they articulate, and where they meet, there's always movement. Joints are always movement. There's different types of joints in the body, which means there's different types of movement available in each of those joints. But anywhere two bones meet, they articulate, and it's considered a joint, defined as a joint. So this bone here, the scapula, notice this little reservoir, that would be the socket of this ball and socket joint. This bone here, which we're still waiting, come on, somebody type it in the chat. What's the name of this bone here? Upper arm bone. It's shaped differently at the end. You see this rounded end. So this would be considered the ball of the ball and socket joint. Ball and socket joint. Anybody? Come on, I see some of you guys are here live. Hi, by the way. I love that you guys are here joining me live. Who knows the name of this bone? Upper arm bone. It's not the femur. That's the leg. Gary's looking for an anatomy book. I love it. Way to be committed. We want to know the names of the bones, mostly because we want to know where they articulate with another bone. Once we have a name for something, we can have an identification for it. Just like us, our name means that we have an identification. So it's okay if you don't know the names of bones, but the reason you want to know the names of bones is that you can ID them. When you can ID them, they become technicolor for you. They create a story in your mind or create a picture in your mind. It's kind of like when you know the name of a friend, you think of that name and you think of that person. Usually what you think about are a few characteristics of that person, their energy, how you feel around them. Same thing goes for everything in the body and anything that you put a name to. The name of this bone is what's on the table right now. Gary, you getting it? It's hot seating, man. When you're here in club seats, man, you're going to learn, right? Okay. Anybody in the chat on YouTube want to type in the name of this bone? The bone that makes up the ball of the ball and socket joint of the shoulder. Anybody? Perry, it's the humerus. Hey, Perry, I'm glad you're here. Humerus bone. Haha, so funny that we couldn't remember that one for a second. So this is the humerus. This is the scapula. At the end of the scapula, there's this interesting shape here that's considered the socket of the ball and socket joint. Now, the joint itself has a name. Glenohumeral joint, glenoid fossa, humerus bone, glenohumeral joint. Okay, not to be confused for any of the other joints in the shoulder. Okay, this one is the 360 joint. This is the one that has the most movement, and it's going to look like I'm making this up because Murph's arm isn't attached right now, but it's literally a 360 joint in all directions. Okay, now we know it's a 360 joint, and the reason why that matters is because the more movement that's available at a joint, the more muscles that are involved in doing that movement. As soon as we know that there's muscles involved with doing a movement, we need to know what those muscles are so we know, again, what to target. Either as a manual practitioner, like what muscle is the problem, what movement was it attempting to do when this client got hurt, or what movement can't this client do, and that's what's causing their pain. And if you're a movement practitioner, you need to know what muscle should be doing the job because recruitment is prevalent. Your clients will try all kinds of, we call it cheating, right? Cheating and not moving optimally. And that's just part of our design. Our body will do anything you ask it to do, even if it has to create a non-functional pattern to make that happen, or a non-optimal functional pattern. It's still a functional pattern. All right, so we want to know that this is where the movement's happening between these two bones. Now that matters because that means that this bone needs to be in position doing what it does. And there's a ton of scapular action as well, and muscles that only move the scapula. Scapular movement is not shoulder movement. Scapular movement is not shoulder movement. Scapular movement, scapular movement. However, and this is where it gets super complex for us, which is why I want us to know this, as soon as the scapula moves, so does the glenoid fossa, the end bony landmark. As soon as that moves, there's an effect on this joint. Doesn't mean it's creating shoulder joint action. It means that there is an effect on the humerus. I find this mostly true as I'm working through orthopedic issues and musculoskeletal pain and dysfunction. I find this to be mostly true when it comes to stabilization or lack thereof of the scapula, and not necessarily movement of the scapula, although we need to have movement of the scapula. What I mean by that is if this bone and this bone move against each other, and they do to create shoulder movement, that means that they both need to have an orientation of optimal alignment to be able to make that happen, so that the joint action is by design and therefore safe and therefore absent of pain and therefore absent of causing pain. Okay, I will also say that if you're remedying musculoskeletal pain for clients that you work with, you want to know what that alignment should be, because as soon as you restore someone's design back to the way it is designed, and then activate the muscles to do the job of whatever the joint action is, you're healing them at the same time. So it's sometimes a misunderstanding from especially manual practitioners that they somehow have to do some magic answer, complicated intervention to be able to restore function and mitigate pain. And I promise you, it's more simple than that. The answer of what to do is in the anatomy. It's not in the fancy technique. And I say that with reverence. I have a whole wall of certificates of techniques because I thought the answer was outside of me too. But interestingly enough, as we say in a philosophical state, that the answers are always within us, the answers are literally within us, like in our structure. The answer is in our structure. If this bone is returned back to its neutral alignment, and this bone is returned back to its neutral alignment in relationship to the bone it articulates with, and then I go to do a joint action and I know what muscle is supposed to do it and I make sure that it does, I've actually healed the pain. Because when we move the way we're designed with the body parts that are supposed to do the moving, there's no pain. So that can sometimes just be the answer. Now, do you need to maybe intervene sometimes and do some manual technique? Sure. Do you need to intervene sometimes and actually have some movement skill available? Sure. But rather than get too lost in the sauce around all of that, just, I promise you, return the body to its design. And I say this a lot. You guys ask me questions, which I love, and I love supporting you. That's literally why I'm here. It motivates me to be here every week to serve you in this way. And the questions that I get about, well, I have a client with X, Gina, what do I do about it? The way we get to the answer is by through the anatomy. What you're really asking me is what's the anatomy involved in this pain? And what do I need to know about the anatomy? And what does that anatomy need to then do so that it's out of pain? If you just add the word anatomy into every part of that question, you'll get to where you know the answer lies. Okay. So it's imperative that we know joint action. When the scapula is in a neutral position, it has a beautiful socket to hold the ball of the head of the humerus in. Great. Except that what we mostly have in our experience is protracted scapula, which means now that this joint is more anterior and medial than where it is by design neutrally, which now I can't do that with Murph because his scapula is bolted on. But now what that means is that the action between these two is now distorted from its optimal design, its neutral design. That matters. Sometimes it's not that I need physical therapy for my shoulder. I just need to return this back to neutral so that this joint is sitting in a neutral position and then I have access to all the muscles. When we distort the alignment of a joint, we don't have access fully to the muscles that move that joint. The way to maximize the lever system, which is the muscles on either side of the joint, the way to maximize that is by putting the lever in neutral. And then you have maximum access to the muscles that move that lever, that joint. So that seems also like a really simple definition. And it is a simple definition. And what we need to then know is, well, what is the neutral position of that joint? What is the neutral position of that joint so that I can return it back to that neutral position? Okay, so again, I'm appealing to us. We need to know the joints and we need to know the joint actions. Now, one more thing I want to share with us about the instability of this joint, and another plea for you guys to really like bring it back to neutral is, as I mentioned, it's one of the most unstable joints of the body, which is not a problem. We just need to be responsible for it. Because of the shape and orientation of this glenoid fossa, which is almost perpendicular to the earth, in order for this bone, the humerus, to be held onto the torso, for this joint to have accurate articulation, there's got to be a tremendous amount of muscle power here of stabilizers that like hold the humerus onto the torso. In order for them to do their job, this joint has to be in alignment. If the joint, now here's where it gets tricky and obvious. If this joint is not in alignment, if we have protracted scapula, this joint not being in alignment means that it also can't be as stable because there's an imbalance in the lever of the alignment of these two bones, which means I don't have as much access to the muscles that do jobs at that lever. Okay, so alignment matters not only for joint action, but also for stability. Alignment matters for all kinds of things, by the way. So we really want to know the joint and we want to be able to put it back into its neutral position. And also consider that the muscles that hold this bone, the humerus, onto the glenoid fossa, onto the scapula, are largely, but not solely, largely rotator cuff muscles. Now, isn't that interesting? If we think about the rotator cuff as only the muscles that do this, medial and lateral is usually what they do, but the movement of the joint is what I was illustrating. If we think that the rotator cuff does this, medial and lateral rotation, meaning moving this ball in the socket, but we overlook the idea that the rotator cuff is also by design more oftenly holding the humerus onto the glenoid fossa, it's doing that 24/7. Your body has to hold this bone onto this bone 24/7, and it's got the pull of gravity making that even more challenged. That is happening 24/7, even if I don't medially or laterally rotate at the shoulder joint. Even if I don't enlist the rotator cuffs for medial and lateral rotation, they still have to work and be strong to hold this bone onto this bone. And all actions of muscles require that the bones that they move, including stabilizing, which is a different type of movement, it's an intrinsic movement, all bones that muscles affect have to be in alignment for the muscles to be able to do their job. So either way you slice it, we want to know the alignment of these two bones, the scapula and the humerus. Okay, that's first and foremost. What we then start to look at is, well, what joint actions are available? What movement actions are available? Once we've established it's got to be in alignment and there's a ton of stability happening here, then we can start looking at the phasic action and what actually happens by way of joint action. And I really, 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 really recommend that you look at it in that order, especially when it gets to this joint, because there's no way that the muscles at this joint are gaining strength unless we actively move this joint. Even the muscles in our lower extremity, as we talked about the hip joint last week, even these muscles are getting movement because we walk. Even if we're using the incorrect muscles, there's some movement available, even in the joint itself. And they're also getting stronger because we're weight bearing on them and then moving. But that's not happening in the shoulder joint. This is all elective. I know I might never put weight on my arm. I might never move my shoulder joint, certainly in full action and maybe not even regularly. Think about how many hours you sat at your computer or at your desk and how many hours went by before you moved your shoulder. Now you could say, well, arguably, Gina, I didn't move my hips in the same period of time either. Correct. But when you got up to go walk to the bathroom, you moved your hips, not your shoulders more. Right. So just keep that in mind as we're looking for like, well, what's the source of the problem? Like, how did this client even get into this problem? It's not usually from the movement they did. It's from the alignment that they were in when they did the movement. Okay. So think about that. If your client sits with radically protracted scapula and now they're being assessed for the need for potential rotator cuff surgery, I urge you to consider that maybe that rotator cuff isn't the issue. Maybe it's the alignment that these two bones were in when they went to go do a movement. Okay. And I also talked a lot about this. We had a Tuesday training just on rotator cuff injuries, and we talked about the intervention of physical therapy and all the aspects of rotator cuff injuries. We'll pin that to this video if you're watching it on replay, and you could go watch that too if you're like, wow, I didn't think about the rotator cuff that way as a stabilizing tool. Absolutely, I want you guys to know that. It just makes a huge difference. Okay, so let's get into the phasic action, joint actions now at the shoulder. Let's name some of them. Tell me what the joint actions are available at the shoulder, not the scapula, but at the shoulder. Gary, you want to name some? It's a 360 joint, so there's a lot of options. You're muted.
I don't know if the deltoid's involved here or not, but I would say deltoid.
Okay, well, let's just name the joint actions before we start assigning muscles to them.
The
Yep.
joint action.
Joint action, yep.
So flexion, extension, adduction, abduction.
Great.
Those
Yep,
hyperextension, maybe, I don't know.
Okay, you're doing great. You're doing great. I like to focus on 6 primary shoulder joint actions first, because I feel like when we get those, it answers a whole lot of questions for a lot of other things. So let's walk through those. You started naming them perfectly. What does shoulder flexion look like? Where would the humerus be in shoulder flexion?
Up in front.
Yes, up in front. Really important. Up in front, up in front, up in front. I know a lot of yoga teachers who like to say this is extension. Extending your arms up to the sky is not the same as naming the joint action. Okay, I'm not being pedantic. I'm appealing that we want to know what the joint action is so we can know what muscle's doing the job and then be able to target the muscle. So somebody said, well, does it matter if I call this extension or if I call it something else? No, unless you have a name for the opposite. So what's the name of the opposite? What does extension in the shoulder look like, Gary? If this is flexion, what does extension look like?
It's movement back, behind the body.
Behind the body this way?
No, straight down and back.
Yeah, so we start from a neutral, again, that alignment, that neutral alignment. You always want to start your joint actions from that neutral place. So this is extension, and then, so this is neutral, or for some people, they call that extension to start with. We talked about that when we did hip as well. Don't let that deter you. But behind the body is a different joint action from the hand down at the ground, not hand up at the sky, and then arm behind. And I like to call this one extension. Perry's got flexion, extension, AB and adduction, lateral and medial rotation. Exactly. Those are the ones we're going to start with. So flexion, arms in front, arms above, extension, arms behind. Okay, great. How often do we do extension? What times of the day do you ever have your arms behind you?
When you're going to the bathroom, you're reaching for toilet paper.
If you're reaching for toilet paper. So like not that often and typically one-sided, right? One,
Right,
not both. So think
right.
about that, right? We need to have symmetry in the body for
Uh-huh.
us to have equal strength and equal function. And so again, if we're just going to target the client who says, oh, I think I have a rotator cuff injury. Well, if they only move to extension sometimes, and without getting too detailed, that's only if you're a back wiper. Some people are front wipers and they don't actually extend their shoulders. But
Mhm.
if you're reaching for toilet paper and it's one-sided, it's only one-sided. But now I go to the gym and I'm doing a bench press, or I go to yoga and I'm doing downward dog. And now both of my shoulders need to do the same joint actions, and only one of them is even used to doing that sometimes. Okay. I will also say, because we're identifying joint actions here, if we're really only looking at extension of the shoulder and I'm reaching behind me, mostly what's happening is I'm rotating my torso to reach behind me, and then I'm extending my shoulder in that order, which might really reduce the amount of range that I create here in this joint action. So why does this matter? Because we're looking for what caused the rotator cuff sensation in our client. We're looking for the cause of that. We're not just going to start blaming muscles for being a problem. It's the action that they're supposed to take. And how often is that action happening? Is it happening equally on both sides? And is it coming from a neutrally aligned position first? If all of those questions can be answered, you'll find the source of the problem. Otherwise, you're just cupping and tapping and stretching muscles just to keep you busy so that it looks like you know what you're doing, and the client leaves without having this function restored. Okay, now let's move on to AB and adduction. AB and adduction, what does that look like, Gary? What's abduction?
AD is external rotation.
No, not
External.
not rotation. AB and adduction, there's no rotation in there yet.
Um, mm,
Hmm,
mm, well, I don't know how to describe it.
that's okay. Try.
The movement of the humerus is now, oh, um, in this case, it would be lifting toward the sky. So, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Exactly. I love that you said the movement of the humerus. So what I want you guys to picture is the movement is here. We don't
Mhm.
want to get into like what the hand is doing or the elbow, because the joint action that we're describing right now is right here. It's when I like to think of it like a V, right? If this is neutral, this is like making a V or a TP or an A frame, right? I like to think about the ball moving in the socket in that way. Another way to remember AB and adduction, if you're just learning joint actions, is AB is away, AD is adding it back into towards the midline, towards the person, adding it back to the skeleton. So adduction is moving it towards, and it doesn't have to be back to neutral. It can be beyond neutral. So adduction is still, beyond just what is neutral. Neutral is no joint action. Okay, great. And then you started to say rotation. Let's do medial and lateral rotation. What's medial and lateral rotation look like of
So
the
medial rotation would be moving the shoulder inward toward yeah,
Yep.
toward, yeah. And the lateral rotation would be just that opposite movement. So
Away.
yeah, away.
Exactly. Beautiful. Okay, great. And again, that's a function of this ball and socket joint. So notice specifically today, I'm not even showing you Murph's arm. I'm not even showing you from the elbow down. We tend to think, and I used to do this too, that if the palms turn away or the palms turn forward, I have lateral rotation of my shoulder. But that's not true, especially for hypermobile people, because there are other actions, joint actions that happen in the forearm. That's what the radius and the ulna are about. So I could be turning my palm out, but notice my glenohumeral joint never moved. I'm just doing supination and movement here between the radius and the ulna. So don't mistakenly think that the joint action happens in the, more distal part of the extremities, although certainly open your eyes to at least consider what's going on. So we used the feet last week when we were going over hip joint action, and it's not in the feet, but the feet were a telltale sign. The feet and the hands are a telltale sign when the joint action is optimized.
Hmm.
But the feet and the hands and other parts of the extremities, the knees and the elbows, etc., are not a telltale sign of joint action when there's a dysfunction in the joint action. However, you do need to see what tells are telling, right? Like, is the knee doing all the work instead of the hip doing all the work? That's a problem for the knee. We want to see that that's happening in the knee. And I would say the same thing with the elbow. When we get to some joint actions, especially medial and lateral rotation, and I'm going to just give you the context here, medial and lateral rotation. When we're doing medial and lateral rotation, oftentimes what we'll do is move the elbow instead, which is really, if you look at the joint action, that's abduction, not lateral or medial rotation. If the elbow's doing the driving, right? The elbow is behind my hand here. If the elbow's doing the driving, it looks like I have joint action happening, but most of it's happening at the elbow. But here's the thing. I don't have to have movement that's different at the elbow than at the humerus. It's one of the ways that we quote cheat or recruit or create compensatory patterns. And for those of us who are here, that's what we're looking for. So we need to know what the clean joint action is first and what that looks like to be able to I spy, oh, that's not what medial and lateral rotation is supposed to look like. There's other things going on. Yeah, Gary.
So are you saying, I mean, when we're trying to assess this, that we try to isolate that movement away
Yes.
from any other joint?
Yes.
Yeah. So if I say to the client, you lift your shoulder to the side, don't use your elbow. We're looking for what's moving in the shoulder and not what's going on here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're a movement practitioner, again, you want to know what is the joint action that's happening and what's supposed to happen. The most tell on this one is push-ups, right? So when we don't have enough strength in this area to do a push-up, what we're going to do in a push-up is we're going to do elbow flexion and shoulder extension, right? There's our push-up, right? But if I don't have enough strength here to lower down into shoulder extension with elbow flexion, what I'm going to do is splay my elbows out, push up. But look what happened at the shoulder joint when I did that. It's no longer in neutral. So it's not technically an even flexion extension joint action. So that's what I mean about the clean joint actions. What am I actually trying to do here? And is that happening at that joint? That's when I would use other areas in the extremities to look. But I wouldn't use the hands or the elbows to tell me if I have flexion or extension or rotation. But I would need to know, what do they do in that clean version of that action? I've been using this word clean lately when it comes to joint actions because lots of things can go on and we might miss some details as we're moving through. The other thing that I'll share with you again, just to kind of give us context one more time, is that when we have these movements happening and we're bearing weight like downward dog, push-ups, etc., or even presses in front of us at the gym, right? Doing shoulder presses. As soon as you add external weight or your own body's weight, the neutrality of the alignment of these two bones is imperative. It's imperative. Because if these two bones aren't aligned, I don't have access to the muscles that do that joint action. If I don't have access to the muscles that do that joint action, my body is going to do whatever I ask it to do anyway, and it will recruit other muscles from another reciprocal inhibition group of lovely muscles. And now I'm into trouble land because somebody else or a group of somebody's muscles who are not designed to do the job are now doing the job that I'm insisting on, and that's creating the problem. That's creating the problem. So for manual practitioners, that's one of the reasons why I really appeal to us to at least, as you said, Gary, know the joint action in isolation. Just be able to ID that muscle in isolation. You don't have to become a movement practitioner if you're not a movement practitioner. If you want to be, great. You don't have to be, though. You just need to know the joint actions. And I will say, as both a manual and movement practitioner, I knew the joint actions on paper because we're all taught that. And I knew the muscles on paper because we're all taught that. And state board requires that we know the names of them and where they insert. But knowing the application of them, you guys have heard me say this, you can't just take good notes. You've got to be out there trying. This is what I mean about applying this information. These 8 principles that I share with you in the Applied Functional Anatomy course and what we've been doing today and last week in Tuesday training here is actually putting it into application. So you don't want to just think about it on paper because it looks different when somebody's moving in space, not on one-dimensional paper, and absolutely starts to look very different when they have these patterns that they brought into the mix. Like, how is that even happening? Because the body will do whatever you ask it to do, even if it has to make it up. And that make it up thing is where the pain is. Okay. Now, I'm just going to pause us there on joint actions. We're just going to use those 6 for our workshopping today. I do want to acknowledge that when it comes to shoulder joint action, there are a lot of horizontal versions of everything, almost everything we just talked about. If you're into that, cool. I recommend, though, that you learn, if you're just learning joint actions and you're learning them in space, to learn them in the top 6 that we just talked about: flexion, extension, AB and adduction, and lateral and medial rotation. And I mean that for a million reasons. Just learn those 6 first, and then you can get into the horizontals of it. The reason why I do it in that order is you need to be able to visually assess clean joint action. You need to be able to visually assess when people are in all kinds of positions in space. And you need to know the reciprocal inhibition, the concert of muscles that do the job. Once you get into horizontals, now you're like tag teaming almost. So, and again, as we're talking about shoulder joint action, it is not the same as scapular action. So let me just pull up some slides here, or a slide. We're going to use a visual aid like we did last week, which I thought was super fun. And give me one second.
Hey, hello and welcome
Wow,
back.
that
We
is
are
not what we need to hear right now. Okay. It's fun because if I had a producer, we could get this produced super quick, but I was on another training just before this, and so this is what we're up to, and that's so cool. All right, so we are going to get our screen up here. We're going to use Kim again. Some of the images that we used last week are still on the slide, but there's also new images on the slide this week because we're going to focus on the shoulders. Notice if right away, if when you looked at these positions, and you just need to know that they're positions of the body, it doesn't have to be yoga, it doesn't have to be Pilates, it's just we're looking at joint actions. And notice for yourself, just be honest, because it'll help you ID where your brain goes. Notice if when you first looked at all of these images, if you started getting lots of information, if you're like, oh my gosh, her legs and her leggings and her joint action, and wow, look at all that flexibility. Notice if you started doing that. Some of us process information in that way. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Just notice if you did that. The reason that I want you to notice that is it's possible when you're working with clients that you get yourselves like in the weeds too quick. It's really common. I hear it a lot from those of you who are honest and vulnerable with me, so that when I'm, working one-on-one with practitioners and I'm trying to figure out how to help fill in the gaps and create clarity, that's often what'll happen. I'm just listening to how they're thinking through and what they're noticing, and it's just like a flood of information right away. If you don't know that you're doing that, though, it's hard to catch yourself. So just notice if that happened. It would be normal. There's no criticism or failure. You just want to catch yourself. I tend to look at shiny things too. And then I'm like, oh, I'm looking at the shiny thing. Let me listen, right? Bring myself back to center here. So just notice if that happened. And then remember what we're looking for. We're on joint actions of the shoulder right now, right? We're on joint actions of the shoulder right now. So let's look together at image A, top left corner of your screen. What shoulder joint action is happening in version A? Which shoulder joint action? If you guys are here watching, I see a couple more of you popped on to join us live. I'm so glad that you're here. Use the chat section and ID the shoulder joint action in image A, image in the top left corner. What do you got? Anybody?
Flexion.
Flexion, exactly. Remember, for yogis especially, or Pilates people have said this too, extend your arms up to the sky. That's sure, you're extending your arms up, but the joint action is happening at the shoulder, and that
Mhm.
joint action is flexion. Okay, perfect. So what's the joint action of the shoulder in image B? What's the joint action of the,
That's extension.
say it again, Gary?
Extension.
Extension, yes. I would also say there could be some lateral rotation happening here, and that you would
Mm.
have to ID on the client that you're working with. Okay, I'm gonna hold up Murph here again in a second. I know I'm super small right now for you on the screen, but let me just give you this as a potential visual aid here. So Kim, and I didn't mention this, this is a beautiful yogi on in Eastern Europe. And if you don't already follow her on Instagram and you want to look at joint actions that are clean, she's your girl. So I kept her name obviously up here. We thank you, Kim, for all of this amazing imagery for us to learn from. And if you want to learn more from her, just go ahead and follow her on Instagram. Now, I will share with you in image B, I can't get Murph into that position. I don't even know if I could get into that position actually, but so she's got a lot going on her hips. She's also got extension of the spine, right? So she's here and her entire spine, which is one of the beautiful things I love. Every segment of her spine moves independently and collectively together. It's just gorgeous to look at. So if she were upright and her arms were behind her like this, they would definitely be extension of the shoulder for sure.
Mhm.
Some people say that because she's brought her hands together, that she's also abducted them. I don't
Oh,
I don't consider it to be abduction when it's behind us, but I can understand where that would happen. And that's where we start getting into this horizontal versions of all the joint actions. So I'm going to
mm.
mention it and I'm not going to dive into it. However, I do want to look at the lateral rotation because when you're here and your shoulders go into extension and then your palms are together, for 99% of the population, you will create, watch this in the joint, you will create some lateral rotation to get that to happen.
Yeah.
Now, why is this important? This is so important, guys. If you're going to look at injuries, this is so important. Here's why. If you mean to do lateral rotation, and the palms stay facing each other, which is what happens. And this is one of those ways that you are going to look at the joint actions and the rest of the extremity, right? If I'm going to do lateral rotation, my palm is going to turn with my arm, with my shoulder. My palm is going to turn. It's going to do that if I'm doing lateral rotation of the shoulder. I can do supination in my forearm and not move my shoulder. But if I'm going to move my shoulder, my hand's going to move too.
But you could also be looking at action in the elbow to bring the palms back. To bring the palms together, you could have uh, elbow uh, movement to bring the palms together. So you could be doing both the lateral rotation and the elbow movements,
Well,
right?
this is where joint action is so helpful, Gary,
Yeah.
because the only two actions available at the elbow are flexion and extension. These are the only two joint actions at the elbow. There is no rotation at the elbow. There's no rotation at the elbow, which is again a beautiful way for us to ID. Wait a minute, I know there's no rotation happening at the elbow, and that body looks like it's doing something at the elbow that it shouldn't be doing. Exactly. That's when you start recognizing where the problem is or where the recruitment pattern is. But here's the deal. Even if you find that the elbow starts doing something it's not supposed to do, it's not doing something that it's not supposed to do out of thin air. It's doing something it's not supposed to do because something up here in the shoulder joint primarily is what's limited. And then I would look at the wrist and hand next. But primarily, that would be indicative of something going awry in the shoulder, which is exactly why I wanted us to look at image B. If it's mainly extension of the shoulder, but I'm going to add lateral rotation of the shoulder to get my palms together, what I need to know as the clinician is, in this person's body, is lateral rotation needed, or is lateral rotation part of the recruitment? The same way you just said, Gary, that elbows could be doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. If elbows are doing anything other than flexion and extension, flexion and extension, flexion and extension, they're about to go bust, because that's the only two joint actions they have. It's a hinge joint. It's like a door. A door can only open and close, open and close, open and close. If it starts wiggling itself on the hinges, we have a problem with that door. Same thing with the elbow. It's a hinge joint. The movement maximization is in the shoulder joint. It's the most movable 360 joint in the body. So I want to start identifying what joint action is needed in whatever I'm doing. And is that joint action borrowing from another joint action, meaning recruiting other muscles, another reciprocal inhibition group of muscles to make this movement look like it's the movement, but now it's not a quote clean joint movement. That's where you start assessing, well, what's the movement? What's supposed to be happening? So that's how I want you guys to walk through and utilize your joint actions. I love that this just came up. And Gary, I know you're in the club with us. Are you moving through applied functional anatomy? Are you diving into that course? I haven't seen you in the study groups, and that's okay, but I just want to make sure that you're getting what you need there in that course and accumulating that
Yeah,
content.
the only problem is I don't know how to put my letters onto the website. So I'll work that out. I don't know. I mean, I have the letters, but now where do I put it?
Oh,
On,
you're talking about Pin It to Win It, what we're playing
yeah,
right here?
yeah.
Yeah, you
Mhm.
just put it in the comment section underneath the video, underneath the replay. But what
Oh,
I'm asking you is, in the club, are you moving through the course, Applied Functional Anatomy, the course of the month? We haven't seen you in the study group, so I'm calling you out on camera here, but
no, that's okay. Yeah, I have not attended, but it's my intention to. So
okay.
thank you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good. I'm
Yeah.
glad that you're going to do that. Yep. Everybody in the club have access to this entire course for the whole month. So we have, 10 days left of January. You have enough time to accumulate all this training if you want to do that inside the full course. It's
Thank you.
course is there. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, now let's look at image C. And again, we're on shoulder joint action. What joint action is happening at the shoulder in image C, top right of the corner of your view?
That's the extension. Extension.
It is extension. Yep. And so I would invite you, everybody who's here, I see you guys on YouTube. Thanks for being here. I would invite you to put your hand on your hip. It's also flexion of the elbow. We're not doing elbow joint actions, but we can see it that it's happened. So do extension of the shoulder and flexion of the elbow. And just notice if you also did some medial rotation. Now,
Mm,
medial rotation in this position, extended shoulder and flexed elbow, medial rotation of the shoulder would then bring the elbow away from the body. It's like what we talked about with push-ups, right? Where we add medial rotation instead of just flexion and extension. So and you could practice it right here. Put your hands on your hips. Oh, Murph just threw his head on the floor. Put your hands on your hips
thank
and
you.
point your elbows back behind you. Point your elbows back behind you so that your elbows are pointing opposite direction of your nose. Okay, that's clean shoulder extension
Extension.
for sure. Now bring your elbows out to the side a little bit so that you could see them in your periphery.
Yes,
You notice that the ball and socket just sort of rolled?
absolutely.
Yeah, so now we
Yeah.
have a different joint action. We have medial rotation of the shoulder. No problem. It's designed to do that. It's a 360 joint. It's got a whole party going on up there. Unless I'm weight bearing, unless I'm targeting a muscle that needs my help, unless there's pain in one of those instances,
Mm,
unless one shoulder is doing something different than the other shoulder.
mhm.
None of those things should be overlooked. So we want to ID the joint action, ID the muscles that do that joint action, get it clean, clean in your brain, put your body in that position, and then see what happens. And then play with it. And then as you're moving your shoulders, this is what I recommend doing. This is part of implementation. I was going to say implications, different conversation. Implementation. As you're moving your shoulder, just like we just did here, call it out. Call it out. Okay, this is extension of the shoulder. We did that visually. Great. Put it in your body. This is still extension of the shoulder. Now my elbows came out. Is it extension of the shoulder? Oh, well, actually, now it's another joint action too. Okay, do you want that? Well, she's standing there with her hands on her hips. Who cares? I mean, do you, right? However, if you're doing push-ups, no, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. That's when I start to get into trouble. That would be not creating the strength in the areas that I want to create strength in to do that action. And how would you know that? Well, that takes us now into what muscles are we targeting? So I'll just stop screen sharing here for a second. This is, well, actually, I'll keep the screen up for just one more second. We're going to move on to muscle action of joints and targeting which ones should occur. We'll do that in next week's Tuesday training, but let me just give you this to workshop it out for yourself this week. If I were doing push-ups, or my client was doing push-ups, or if I was teaching high plank to low plank as a yoga teacher, or any other version of shoulder flexion and shoulder extension, as a movement practitioner, I would ask you guys to consider, what are you targeting? Why would I have someone, what mechanical purpose is why I'm targeting? I know in yoga, there's philosophical connections to poses. I think that's beautiful. We're only on mechanics right now. So if I was going to have someone go into high push-up or a push-up or plank pose or cobra, I want us to, as movement practitioners, know what muscle am I actually targeting to get stronger to do the job. And then if I know what joint action is there and what muscle is targeted, then I'll be able to tell if it's happening and I'll be able to teach to that. If you're a manual practitioner and someone came to you with musculoskeletal pain or discomfort, oh, I really hurt myself in my workout yesterday. Well, what were you guys doing? Oh, it was upper body day. Well, then you got to start thinking about, well, what were the joint actions that were being asked of that body? Were they clean? And did the muscle that's supposed to do the job show up for the job? Or was there some other recruitment pattern that happened? We want to be able to break it down in that way. And that tells us as manual providers what to treat and why we're treating it. We don't have to become movement people to be able to do that. So if I know that I want to do upper body strengthening and I want to strengthen pec major, what joint action does pec major do? Because that's how I'm going to strengthen him. I'm not just going to strengthen pec major by doing all kinds of upper body workouts, because he doesn't do all kinds of upper body joint actions. He only does some of them. So I need to know which ones those are and not overdo, some other version of upper body work thinking I'm getting my pecs to get stronger. They only get stronger if they contract, and they only contract to move a joint. Into what position? So that's what you want to ask yourself as you're targeting muscles, whether you're targeting them to treat them or whether you're targeting them to train and strengthen them. Okay, and then that takes us on to the other images on the slide. So I'm going to give you guys this as an extra pop quiz. If you add this in the chat, the people who add the most answers, I love doing this, you guys. So if you like to play like this, then you're going to love this. For those of you who add the most answers in the chat below this replay video of the joint actions that are happening at the shoulder in especially image D, image E, and image F, because we have not gone over these three together as a class. If you want to add those in the chat section, and if you want to add extra entry points, add the hip joint action that you see in the poses. Some of them we already covered last week, but add them under this video. And the practitioner who's here that adds the most joint actions in the chat section, the comment section below this video, whoever adds and IDs the most joint actions, I will send you an extra training. So I love that you guys are here. You're here right up till the end and you're playing to win right up until the end. I will absolutely support those efforts. And if you also want to win Pin It to Win It, here's our last letter of the day. Pin It to Win It also in the comment section below this video, below this replay. And that, my friends, takes us through our workshopping today for shoulder joint action, not to be confused with scapular joint action, which of course we can cover on another Tuesday training together. I love doing this workshopping. Let me know if the workshopping works for you. I know sometimes when we can't see as big of an image on a screen, we don't enjoy it. I've heard some feedback from some of you that that's true, but also others are like, I love the visual aid. And then Gina, I don't have to just be a talking head. So let me know if you're liking the workshopping by using the visual aids. And if so, I will absolutely add more in for us as we move through our Tuesday training. That is our training for today. If you are hungry for more and you want to work through the applied functional anatomy principles, the 8 principles of movement, please feel free to join us in the club. Again, that entire course is a 16-hour CE course. It's an approved course. You can earn CEs while you're in there. It's included in your club membership. So there's lessons and training and workshopping. There's also study groups every week. Our study groups are led by our anatomy advocates. They are hand selected by me. They are highly advanced level trained practitioners who have taken each of the courses in the club many, many times. So they've each taken applied functional anatomy. We did the head count last week. They each took it at least twice. Someone took it 3 times. So you're in good hands in the study groups each week as well if you really want some support to really gobble down the information and get it fast. Of course, all of that's included in your club membership, the study groups, the challenges that go with our training. I'm in there every day and we're hot seating ourselves and working in community. Come join us in the club. And I will also see you guys here for more Tuesday training live next